Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members and guests. It is November the 14th, 2022, and this is a regular meeting of the West Shore Photography Club. I'm your host and president, Dennis Baker. Okay, tonight we have a panel discussion, a lively panel discussion, I presume. But first, a few items of business. There will be no meeting next Monday night, and that's November the 21st. Okay, the next Zoom meeting will be on the following Monday, November the 28th, at which time I'm going to do a little follow-up to the presentation that Patty Volpe did a few weeks ago. I'm going to talk with you about cell phone photography, smartphone photography. Specifically, as most of you know, I picked up a new iPhone 14 Pro Max a couple of weeks ago, and I've been enjoying it immensely. So I will be referring to that phone, but it will, in a lot of ways, apply to phone cameras that have been manufactured by other companies. I think you'll find some of the things interesting. There are a lot of hidden features, and I'm going to lead the way then. I'm going to talk about the native Apple camera on the 28th, okay? The one that comes with the iPhone. There are other apps, camera apps that you can download and install, like the one from Lightroom. So I'll do a follow-up session a few weeks after that about using the Lightroom camera with the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Okay, last Wednesday evening, we had a special meeting. Mike Donovan and Joe Farrell and I presented preparing for the upcoming Calc print exhibit. We've committed to Calc for the month of December, and we went over all the dates and the physical requirements and some suggestions for getting images from your computer to paper, glass, aluminum, whatever, in order to have them be able to print them and hang them at the exhibit. So we are highly encouraging everyone to participate. Every member is encouraged to submit 1, 2, or 3 prints. Okay, tomorrow in the follow-up email, I'll send out again the specific information about those requirements. Going to mute some people here, folks. There we go. So that's available. If anybody has any questions, shoot me an email, let me know. But hoping that lots of people participate so we can do a nice job with this exhibit. And the recording, by the way, for that special meeting, of course, is still on YouTube and will remain there, as are all of our meetings. We have our own YouTube channel, so you can always go back and watch that. Okay, so the dates there and all that. With mark on your calendar for Friday, I'm pretty sure it's December the 9th, is the opening exhibit at Calc. So you are invited and your family and friends are invited. There'll be refreshments, and we can enjoy the evening together at Carlisle Arts Learning Center. Okay, let me turn it over to Joe to talk about trips.
Okay, we had a trip to Pine Grove this 2 weeks ago, and Norbert, want to give an update on that particular trip down to Pine Grove? You need to unmute yourself, Norbert. I think we muted everybody.
Yes, we had a pretty good turnout for that. I think we had 17 or 18 members show up, and yeah, it was just a great morning. Probably lighting was not what we wanted, but there's other things to photograph, and there's always a lot of things that you can find down in Pine Grove to photograph. But anyway, I want to thank everyone for showing up, and I think we had a good time for all.
Okay, great. Thanks, Norbert. Mary, we did the Zoo America on Saturday. You want to give an update on that, please?
Yes, Saturday turned out to be the most beautiful day ever, weather-wise, picture perfect-wise. And I think about the last count I have was about 17 people were there. And every now and then you ran into somebody that wasn't there initially. So there may have been a couple more, but it was a great day. We got to see the wolves. After Joe asked someone to take us down there to, was it Amanda that took us?
That was Amanda.
Took us to see the wolves. So we got there. A lot of us got a lot of good shots of the wolves. And there was a lot of other things. It was a really good day for that.
Great. Okay, thanks, Mary.
You're
And we have an upcoming trip coming on December the 3rd. It is to Gerhardt Machinery. And Eve, would you want to give us an update on what that's like?
Yeah, we've been there numerous times. It is 8 acres of rusted machinery, gears, old Mack trucks. It's a great thing to photograph in all the different seasons. You'll want to wear heavy duty shoes, take something if you want knee pads or what have you. But I've been there, I think 4 times, maybe 5, and I could go back a bazillion more times. A lot of rust, a lot of really unique things, and they allow us access to the entire ground. So it's down in Lidditz. It's not a bad drive. It's a great location. It's a nice little find.
Okay, thank you, Eve. I think, Dennis, that's what I have.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Joe. Okay, tonight we have a panel discussion. So thank you to the folks who sent me questions that I'll be asking tonight. I'll be acting as the moderator, and our panelists are Kurt Wilkie, Elaine Schuch, Eve Smith, Joe Farrell, and I might even respond to a question or two. I'm going to kind of keep this freewheeling, so I'm going to direct questions to a particular panelist, but then we're going to bounce it around and allow the other panelists to chip in. If you have a question or comment, please enter that in chat. I will monitor the chat and interject that as appropriate. And then at the end of the panel discussion, we'll open it up for anyone to comment and ask a particular question or make a comment. All right. So let's get started. Let me direct one to Kurt to start out, since he's one of the newer members of the club. We'll put him on the spot. Kurt, we had a question about spot metering. Okay, spot metering. And, the question is, what is spot metering? Do you use it? And under what circumstances?
Okay, you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yep.
Good. Well, spot metering, it's one of the metering modes that your camera will offer. There's probably about 3 or 4 others. It usually uses about 3% of the center of your screen of your camera. So it's only going to meter that particular area. It does not use the whole area. It only uses the center portion. And it's typically only available in the priority modes. So if you're shooting auto, you may or may not be able to select a metering mode such as spot metering. Typical uses for it, I would say probably a backlit subject. You're worried about your subject being exposed correctly, so you'll put the face maybe of somebody on that spot and then use exposure compensation to get your correct exposure and then go on from there. I shoot manual, so I rarely use it, but there is a use for it in manual mode, which I have found for birding, and that is if I turn it on, it gives me a little circle in the center of my screen, and I just use that for a reference to keep the target, so to speak, on a bird. So that helps me not wander. Anybody have anything else to add?
One question I sometimes get regarding spot metering is, with your system, and I know you're using Canon,
Yes.
is focusing linked to the spot?
Not necessarily. I would say most cameras, it is not. It is, there are going to be some upper end cameras, maybe like Joe and his Z9, it might follow the AF point. But for most cameras, it's just going to be that center portion of the screen, only 3% of it. And if you needed a little bit more, there's partial meterings available, and that will take about 6%, a little bigger area. Yeah, that's about it.
Good.
It's not really commonly used. Most people are going to be sitting on evaluative or matrix metering for probably 99% of their photography.
Well, that's a good lead in. Let's check with the other panelists and see if they use it. Joe, do you use spot metering?
In about last 15 years, I used it once. that the spot metering followed the focus points. Once I've satisfied myself with that, I turned it back off again, and I haven't used it since.
Gotcha. Eve, how about you?
I do not use it either. No,
Elaine?
I have a different opinion. I use it almost exclusively, to tell you the truth, in nature photography, and specifically with flowers, mainly white and very light or bright colored flowers, which are typically very reflective. And I am kind of anal about not blowing out highlights. So it's important to me that that flower or that white bird or any other light colored subject or reflective subject is not overexposed. So in that situation, I will always spot meter to make sure that the subject is properly exposed, and that may very often result in an underexposed background, which for me is not an issue because I tend to like my backgrounds much darker than my light subjects.
Very good. And as far as me, I don't use spot metering. I am, of course, concerned about my exposure. So I tend to favor exposure compensation, over spot metering. Okay, question number 2. Let's go to Elaine for this one. You've been photographing for a fairly long time, like many of us. Do you still consider the compositional elements while you're photographing, or do you just look at a scene and it's inherent and you just shoot?
Well, I can answer that with a definitive, absolutely, it is not intuitive to me or automatic. And it probably never will be. I'm not one who was blessed with creative intuition. I have to really look and think and analyze the subject or the scene. For me, what is intuitive is how I respond to a scene or to a subject or to my vision. And I think that is probably inherent in everyone. The problem is translating what I feel or what my vision looks like to a visual image that will translate that feeling to the viewer. And that's when I have to sit down and really consciously analyze the scene to identify for myself first, what is it that attracted my attention? What is it that made me stand back and say, wow, this is what I want to capture, and this is what I wanted to convey to another viewer that's looking at my image. And so once I've identified that subject or a group of components in the scene or elements, then I look at everything within the scene, all of the compositional elements, to determine which ones I want to keep, what distractions there may be or obstructions that I either need to move or move myself to get rid of them in the frame. What's my point of view? So I take a long time when I'm composing, definitely not automatic, very time-consuming process, analyzing everything to know how I'm going to expose it, what lens I'm going to use to get that look and the feeling that I want in that image.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm so glad you said that. I don't know if you had time, everybody had time to read the email that I sent out today about David Dushman. And he's got a blog post, the latest one that is right on target. I thought that was so good. And it's all about photographing what you feel, not what you see, but more what you feel. And in addition to that, there's a part you should read about an opportunity he has coming up. He's got a program called Backlight that you subscribe to. So whether you're interested in that or not is up to you. But as you may remember, David spoke to our group just 2 years ago, in December of 2020, and made an excellent presentation. And I've been following him for years. So thanks, Elaine. How about the rest of you? Kurt, any comments on composition and thinking about your shot and feeling it?
Nothing more than what Elaine has touched on.
Okay, you feel a similar way about it?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, Joe, how about you?
I feel the same way that Elaine talked about.
Wow.
And one thing in particular, Elaine, when we had the flower workshop, you described how do you see a vision. And I thought that was very instructive. And some point in time in the future, we have to have a session where you talk about how to do that, because a lot of times I say to myself, what's my vision? I don't know what my vision is. It's 2020, so I'm okay, you know, but you described that so well at that flower shop.
Be careful what you ask for, because I could talk for hours about that, and I think some people might fall asleep during that process.
I think that would be very interesting. That would be good. That would be good. And Eve, you want to comment on that composition wise?
Yes, composition is always important to me. I can say that I do both depending on the circumstance. I will work a scene if I have the time and the subject to do so. I will work it until I have what I want. And then even then I post process and I still find flaws that I want to change. But there are those very quick, candid moments in life, whether it's people or the sun or the whatever may be changing, that I got to think quickly, grasp it, get it, and because it's going to be gone. So I can say I do things very quickly, intuitively, but at the same time, if I have time, I will take the time, compose, work it, and do the best that I feel I can to capture what I want.
Yeah, thank you. Joe, what's the name of the videographer that we spoke to the club and talked with us about seeing something that triggered his vision? I have trouble remembering his
That
name.
was
Steve Miller.
Pardon me?
Thank you. I should remember it from the band, you know,
Yeah.
Steve Miller.
Yes.
Anyway, his comment was, and I don't remember anything else he said, but the one thing I do remember is when he looks at a scene, there, he says, "Oh, there's a photograph there somewhere." Something triggers his thinking to say, "There's a photograph there," and then the job is to figure out where is the photograph, what is the best, position for the camera, what does he really want to hone in on. So a trigger lets you know there's something there, but as Elaine says, then it's a hunt. It's a look for it. It's dig it out, work the scene, as Eve said, and find what makes the best photo. Okay, let's jump back to Eve. Eve, I know that you're one of the few of us who are still working.
Yeah.
So this one's specifically for you. How do you find time to photograph for fun when you're so busy, with your regular job and doing other things, household tasks and all that stuff?
Yeah, it can be challenging. Summertime, obviously, household chores, there's double inside and out, but we have light later. I love that we do the trips. It gets me committed to myself to go shoot for fun and not for work, I'd say. It can be difficult working full time. And there are days I'm on the computer all day at work, it's hard to get home and edit and get on the computer. Depends, but I think it's you always have to have a good balance. And honestly, I'm very serious that the trips in this club help me keep that balance.
Okay. Do you tend to wait until you get an urge to photograph, or do you set aside specific times and say, like a trip, I'm definitely going on that trip because I want to photograph?
Probably a little of both. I think we all have that urge, and do something, but depending on the life at the moment, it might have to be planned. And like the zoo trip, I was definitely wanting to get to that. So yeah, which was very successful. I'm glad. That was a great trip.
Very good. Elaine, do you have any tips for them? For those who are still working or very busy?
Oh, I haven't been working for a very long time, so I don't know if I do or not.
Well, but you
Photography,
remember.
since I retired, has pretty much become my life, because when I was working, I did have to put it on the back burner for a very long time because my job required me to travel 80% of the time, and there just was no time to devote to photography. So I went overboard after I retired, and I'm just out there every day, even if it's just in my backyard, practicing.
So is your advice that for folks to wait till they retire?
Not if they can help it.
Joe, how about you?
Oh, I'm kind of like Elaine. I think photography is my life, it seems, in addition to my homeowner projects that I do. And so I try and get out whenever I can, but I have to force myself to go out. I have to plan that I'm going to do this particular day and I'm going to go into this particular area. I just generally almost never just willy-nilly go out. I just have to have a plan.
Yeah. Brooks Jensen, the editor of Lenswork magazine, wrote an article about this, a number of years ago. And he said that, if you just leave it up to whims, a lot of times it doesn't happen because, it's drizzling outside, or it's cold out, or, so many things come up, or I got this other stuff. I got a paper I got to write. I got to take care of one. And he says, you've got to commit to it. Like, put it on your calendar that every Saturday morning at 7 o'clock, boom, that's your time set aside to photograph. Kurt, any ideas for the folks?
Well, first off, retirement's the best job I ever had.
Granted, yes.
Tell me.
And no, I think I get in a rut if I go out quite often, but it seems to be birding or nature. And the club trips really help me get out of that rut. It really opens up other parts of photography for me. So I really enjoy that. And that's one of the best reasons to be in these clubs. And the West Shore Club does it very well.
I was impressed when 17 of us were at Pine Grove Furnace. And Joe, didn't we hear so many of the members say, oh, I've never been here before. This just because the club is here, that's why I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that was impressive.
Yeah.
Or Zoo, anywhere, Zoo America. I had never been to Gerhardt Machinery till the club went. And, like Eve, I've been back a number of times. I love that place. Yeah, very good, very good. Okay, Joe, this is a little bit of a technical question for you, and it came up Wednesday night when we were talking about, doing the prints for the Calc exhibit. If someone wants to sell their prints and they're sending their prints away to have done, and they're confused about the terminology, should they have them printed with a dye-based or pigment-based printer?
If you're going to sell the prints, pigment-based, dye-based is has a touch more vibrancy. It's the kind of ink that's being used, has a touch more vibrancy to it, but it doesn't have as long longevity. It won't last 100 years on a piece of paper, as an example. Whereas pigment inks will supposedly last 100 years. And by the way, I never know how a new pigment ink is released and they can say it's going to last 98 years. I don't know how that works. Okay, but
Right.
they do.
Because nobody's waited.
And if you get any prints made at a professional shop, they're going to use a pigment-based ink, most likely. Or if you were to use the services down at Fine Art Photo, they're going to use the typical chemical process where, like when you had film, they're going to use that for up to like 12 by 18, I think it is. And then beyond that, they will then go to a pigment-based ink. But there's a new ink, it's coming, not new ink, there's a new method coming out, and that is by using a laser printer, a color laser printer. And Gary was telling me at Fine Art that a number of the photo finishers are now starting to migrate to that. I don't think that has entered into the fine art world yet, so you probably won't encounter it. I don't think so for the quality that we want, but pigment for sure, as opposed to dye.
Okay, thank you, thank you. A question was emailed to me about possibility of losing your passion for photography. Have you ever lost your passion? So I'll start this one off. I retired 15 years ago, and the reason I retired, well, what I wanted to do after retirement was photograph, very similar to Elaine. So I would say, no, I have never lost my passion, but I think we all, or almost all of us, go through periods where you're just not as enthusiastic about it. And when I was working professionally, in photography, doing the freelance jobs, the weddings and all that, then you get tied into a schedule like Eve's doing now, where you have to keep doing it. You have to keep yourself motivated because you've got a wedding coming up. You have this, you have that to do. When I don't have those assignments, I try not to feel guilty about downtime with photography, busy with other stuff. So if I take a week or two and I don't photograph at all, or if I photograph with my iPhone and not with my, my Canon cameras. Yeah, that's just what I feel like doing. So I kind of follow my whims a little bit, but it's rare that I'm not excited about some aspect of photography. And there's a lot of things I do to keep myself excited. It's things that I'm interested in. I'm just curious. So I'll watch videos, I'll read articles, I'll see what David Duchemin's doing. I want to know how things are, what's happening. And I like to experiment and try things. It's just, the curious mind that I have. So never really lost the passion, but I go through those ups and downs where I'm busier in photography at some time more than others. Eve, how about you in that topic?
I can't say I've ever burned out. I started in film. I loved working in the dark room. And I think that kind of translates over for me, even into processing now. What can I make of it? What's my end result? But I do other creative things also. So there are times that I might be veering off to another project. This time of year, I always hand make Christmas gifts, for instance. So, but I have to be creative all the time, and I have to have some type of outlet. So, but my primary outlet, I would have to say consistently, is definitely photography.
Very good. Very good. One of the things I really like about photography is the varied aspects. So, I was into portraits for a long time and shooting portraits professionally and doing weddings. And I don't do so much of that anymore, but then, get into macro. Okay. There's always wildlife. Okay. You get bored or, of one area, you just move into another area. There's so much to do. Kurt, comment?
Yeah, I find myself getting in a rut every now and then, but the excitement's there. But I haven't been doing it that long. Not like you have.
Okay. Yeah, I bought my first 35 millimeter camera in 1980 with a birthday present. And when I was still working, we had a workshop or an in-service day at school where they talked about follow your passion. I said, okay, I'm retiring and doing photography. That's the way mine went. Joe, how about you?
No, I don't really have, I don't think I've lost my passion. I do a lot of other things. And so I don't feel bad if I don't take pictures for a week or two, but then I'm planning what's going on the next 3-6 months, where I'm going to go, and getting guides lined up and stuff like that. So it keeps me really busy. I don't lose the passion.
Yeah. Elaine, you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I would agree that I never really lost the passion, even during that time when I wasn't photographing while I was working. I still loved it. I've been doing it since I was 7 years old, and have never lost interest in it. I do go through periods where I feel I've reached a plateau and I become very frustrated that I'm not growing, or get bored with the type of work that I'm generating and need to look for something new like you do. So then I become obsessed with some other genre like macro or just something different to keep that interest going, to keep myself inspired. But the passion is there.
Do you assign yourself projects?
Well, not officially. In my brain, yeah, I do. And a lot of those projects are season specific. So in the winter time, I'm already planning for the types of projects that I want to do this winter.
Yeah. Joe, do you have self-assigned photo projects?
I do, and I did one this past year, and that was on trees. And that was extremely helpful to me, because whenever I would walk like through a park, let's say down at Pinchot State Park, you have all these different scenes. You have the water, you have the trees, you have the leading lines, and you have benches and blah, 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 blah. And I never really concentrated on trees. That was just there. If they would look really pretty, I'd take a picture. But we had a session, one of our speakers, Mark Bowie from the Adirondack Institute, and he talked about trees. And I took that as a mission. And I spent probably 8 days in the field photographing nothing other than trees. And I want to tell you, that really, really made me aware of the compositional elements, how to get rid of the stuff, how to get the mic spots out of it, stuff like that. It really made me study that. And so now if I go for a walk in our neighborhood, as an example, I will look at the trees and only the trees and just try and do that and try and figure out how am I going to make a composition out of it. I think a project like that makes you think about a subject and then work that subject. Otherwise, it's just mishmash, happy snapper kind of a shots for me anyway.
Well, that reminds me of our discussion about your trip to the Olympic National Forest.
Mhm.
I've been there and I've tried to photograph it. It's extremely difficult because it's so chaotic. There's
Yes.
just stuff everywhere, and you've got to try to make some compositional sense out of the chaos.
Yep. Yep.
Kurt, comments on projects you assign yourself? Oh, you're muted, partner.
I'm sorry. Nope, I don't.
Okay, what do you pick to shoot? Just whatever hits your fancy?
Yeah, mostly it's birds in flight right now, but that could change. Gerhardt's might be the next passion.
Okay, okay. So in a sense, birds are your self-assigned project right now.
I guess you could say that.
Okay, Eve, how about you?
No, I can't say I assign projects. I might channel myself into a specific subject for a while, but I would never say they were projects. I'm too diverse, I think, to do. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Okay, the next question is for Kurt to start out at least, and it's about polarizing filters. Joe and I, and maybe some of the rest of you, subscribe to Jim Zuckerman's Photo Insights, a monthly newsletter. And in the October, which is just last month, he surprisingly made this comment, quote, "With digital images and the ability to manipulate colors so effectively in post-processing, a polarizing filter isn't necessary." That surprised me. How about you, Kurt?
Yeah, I guess I could sell my polarizing filters now. But
I mean, I've been following Zuckerman for years, and usually I agree with almost everything he says.
yeah, I'm not familiar with what he's doing, but I find them an invaluable tool. They reduce the glare off your foliage. They take specular highlights, maybe even eliminate them. Allows you to see into the water. Maybe there's some items in the water that you want to be part of your composition, and that adds to the composition. It does make the colors more saturated. That you could probably find in Photoshop. It adds more contrast too. I think your skies, your clouds, that type of thing. And I find that a polarizing filter is variable too. You don't have to go from 0 to 100% with a polarizing filter. I think you just need to turn it up to where you think, that's what I want. I might want a little specular highlight here or there for realistics. Things like that. I use Breakthrough Photography ones, and I really like them. They have a real neutral color cast to them, and I think that's one you have to be concerned about when you're buying polarizing filters. Is it going to give me a color cast, or is it going to give me blotchiness in the sky? Sometimes the blues will kind of be blotchy in the inexpensive polarizers.
Do you have a brand that you recommend?
I think any of I wouldn't buy one for $30 and expect much from it. But usually any of those that are like in the $100, $150 range, you're probably going to get a pretty nice polarizer for that amount of money. They will vary a little bit in price according to the diameter that you need to fit your lens, like a 77 millimeter or 82 millimeter. But I think they're pretty invaluable. They're the two filters I use are circular polarizers and neutral density. They're the only two that I have, and I wouldn't give them up.
Okay. Can you accomplish what a polarizing filter does in post?
I don't see how you're going to see through glare into the water and pick out that nice rock for your composition. I don't see how that's happening. Maybe you could pull it from something else and drop it in Photoshop, but I don't know where he's coming from on that. I didn't get to see the article, but yeah, I don't know where he's coming from there.
Yeah, Joe, your head was going back and forth pretty rapidly there.
Right. You probably saw that.
Yeah, I did.
You may know, I know some of you that are on Facebook, when we were down at Mill Creek, I took a picture of the water without a polarizer, and it was nothing but glare on the rocks and the water. It looked horrid. I had the polarizer on and I set it to maximum, and you could now, as Kurt was saying, you could see through the water, the rocks, you could define the rocks, and all of the glare was gone. And it also removed any little bit of glare on the vegetation. And I, just as Kurt was saying, he takes it and he dials it in, and I do that too, because you can actually over polarize it.
Yeah.
Because you take all of the glare off the green vegetation. It doesn't look natural, it looks very flat then. And so, yeah, I couldn't live without my polarizer and with my ND filter. Those are the only two filters that I use.
Elaine, anything to add?
Yeah, it's pretty invaluable to me. I shoot in the woods a lot because I live in the woods, and that the specular highlights on foliage is out of control, and it's very unsightly. So that's what I use it for most, as well as when I'm photographing reflective flowers to eliminate some of that glare as well. When I'm photographing water, I prefer to use a neutral density filter, and mainly because I have a difficult time rotating the polarizing filters to get it exactly where I want it. It's still a challenge for me. I do see the value in it, but I prefer to use neutral density, especially if I'm shooting slow exposures and I want to get that silky look in the water or the waterfalls. But also I will take the polarizer off if I'm shooting reflections in the water, because the polarizer will remove those beautiful reflections. So that's one time when they are definitely a disadvantage for me.
Okay, yeah, plus you lose like a stop and a half or 2 stops when you do use a polarizing filter. Eve, any addition to that?
The only time I use polarizer is an outdoor shoot in landscape. I don't use it for any portraiture or weddings, anything like that. But I agree. I'm not, anything you can do like that when you're shooting versus having to post-process, I think is a plus. I'm not sure. There are times that you didn't get it, you work the post-processing, but if you can do it right and use that, not get the specular highlights, I have to agree with that. And I agree with Elaine too, the neutral density for water to get that milky look, you can't beat that.
Okay. Yeah, since the digital age began, everything I've ever read indicated that the polarizing filter was one that you really, really need to use because you can't replicate the effect in post-processing. So, all right, let's go to Elaine with this question. Color. How important is color in your photography?
Oh, it's almost as important as light. That is a wide open question. Color is important in many aspects. Even the absence of color is important. Not only in black and white photography, but it's important in color photography as well, because color can be a distractant. If your subject is, say, it's a portrait of a beautiful woman with white, creamy skin, the saturation and the hue of that color in the background is critical. It's important that it be secondary to the subject, and so you may need to downplay the color either by desaturating it or lightening it or darkening it, or blurring it completely or removing it. There are so many aspects of color that make a huge difference in the effect that you're image has on the viewer that, again, I can't say enough about how important color is. And even in black and white photography, adjusting those color sliders will make a huge difference in the contrast effects.
Yeah, I think that's a lot, or an issue that a lot of people don't necessarily think about. They're using black, they're thinking black and white. So like in Lightroom, they would just convert it to black and white, but it's critical to adjust those color sliders to manipulate the contrast the way you want. Yeah, you had talked earlier about the feel of a photograph. Is color important in feel?
Oh, absolutely. If I'm composing something that gave me a feeling of calmness, for example, I'm probably not going to want a bright red object somewhere in that composition, because red is one of those colors that excites people. In fact, restaurants will use red tablecloths sometimes just to get people moving, so they don't sit there and get too relaxed and stay there forever in a day. But then there are times when you want even conflicting colors sometimes, not necessarily complementary. You know, say, for example, a photograph of a teenager walking down the street who's trying to make a statement or declare her independence or her way of independent thinking by wearing extremely gaudy, flashing, conflicting, discordant colors that you wouldn't normally include in a photograph, but that may be the subject of that photograph, is what this person is trying to tell you, or a little bit about their personality.
Very good. Thanks. Joe, color.
Yeah, I take color into consideration, but one thing that I do, sort of off the topic a little bit, is I use my picture controls or picture styles if I'm going to be thinking in black and white so I set my camera to be in black and white through the picture styles or the picture controls, but I'm shooting in RAW, so I always have the color. But when I look at the image on the back of the screen in the viewfinder, I'm looking and I'm seeing in black and white. And that helps me to do my composition, to see, you know, that works for me real well. But then when I get back into post-processing, it comes in as color. Then I really quickly convert it back to black and white, but I have all those color controls to change the blue to make it really dark, as an example, on the sky and stuff like that. That's how I use color.
Good, thanks. Kurt, how about you in color?
I really don't have anything more to add to that. I think they pretty well covered it.
Okay, thanks. Eve?
I love to work with complementary colors. I love that and monochromatic, and I love the finds of that. Two quick examples. When we were shooting at the Capitol Walk, a guy was walking his red husky. Everything about that photo was not planned. He walked up behind us. I just turned. I said, "May I take your photo?" Took 3 shots of him, I think, and the whole scene is all really the same tone. Things like that excite me. I think it's a very comfortable feeling to look at those type of images. And I agree with Elaine. You don't want something distracting. So you have to be concerned about background color or the little spot of background color. You don't want to take it away from your subject. So yeah, color is very important.
Do you ever change colors in post, like desaturate or actually change a color?
Yeah, no, I can't say I've changed a color. I've definitely desaturated. I'll do selective color, turning the whole image black and white, but leaving a red wine glass or what have you, something that pops if it's the right feel to it. But yeah, definitely I've desaturated.
Okay. Anybody else on changing colors in post? Okay. All right. Eva, let's go right back to you. I know you do weddings, so tell us, are weddings as stressful as the rumor I hear?
They're not for the light of heart, I guess. You have to be on. You've got to be creative, technical. You've got to be observant. You got to watch the entire time. I have a saying that the day after a wedding is a wedding coma day. You're just physically and mentally, it's adrenaline the whole day of the wedding. So the next day it's whoosh, which is, of course, is usually an editing day. But if you're comfortable with what you do, you're on somebody else's time schedule. That can be stressful. There are many little aspects of it that can be stressful, but you have to be flexible. You've got to direct people without dictating to them, and be very observant, capture it. So,
Eve,
yeah.
Eve, if I can ask you a question on that, have you ever had a catastrophic equipment failure during a wedding?
No, thank God I've never have. I always have backup. And it's really nice if you have a second shooter with you too, for that. The flash didn't go off for that shot or something dumb like that, that you can rely on a secondary thing. The only time I've ever had an issue, actually, I was a second shooter and we had brought soft lights or soft boxes into a very dark church. And we were having a heck of a time electrically to get it to work. It was an old church, blah, blah, blah. That's a stress moment. You know, you don't want to look like you don't know what you're doing. But anyways, no, I always have a secondary. I always have a second backup camera on me ready for any disaster, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's
I hope
absolutely critical.
Yes, I hope I didn't curse myself with that, but yeah.
Yeah, I did weddings for about 7 years, and I'd have to say the part that I enjoyed was that after preparing, after practicing for years of photographing and doing different techniques and little macro stuff and working with people, when you do a wedding, it requires every type of photography and just about every skill you've ever developed. So if you get through the day and you haven't committed suicide, you feel like pretty good about it, you know, that you've accomplished something. So yeah, that's the joy I got out of photography, but it does out of weddings, but they can be stressful. Anyway, let's move on. Joe, oh, you've done a lot of focus stacking over the years, Joe. Tell us about focus stacking. How difficult is it? When do you use it?
I think focus stacking is one thing that people really want to shy away from because they don't understand it. But once you start it and use it, it becomes very easy, in my opinion anyways. So there's two parts to focus stacking. One is the capture part, and the second is the post-processing. When you use focus stacking would be, for instance, when we were at the Hershey Zoo, I used it quite a bit. We had, in one case, we had two owls that were not on the same plane. One, they were like this, one was forward and one was back. Okay, and since I'm shooting at an f2.8 type of a focal length using a very long lens, I had a very shallow depth of field, and I couldn't get both of them in focus at the same time. And I thought that was important to me. So in taking the shot, I did two things. I held the camera, I went wide, so I had lots of wiggle room. I went wide and I focused on the first, the eye on the first owl. I'd said eagle, I meant to say owl, on the first owl. And then without moving my camera as much as I could, I moved the focus point over to the other owl's eye and I took his picture or her picture, okay? So now I had those two images captured, both with focusing at different spots, one on the foreground and one on the background like that. And then when I got into Lightroom, I took both of those into Photoshop and as layers. And then there's a little magic you can do. It's a very simple little thing by alignment and then stacking. There's two little commands that you do, and it brings those together, and it brings only the focus. It brings in the sharpest parts of the image. And if it's out of focus, it throws it away. And actually that works really well. And I can do that, and I try and do that as best as I can if I'm handheld, but I obviously much prefer to be on a tripod for that, so I don't have any movement. But That's when I use focus stacking. Now you can do that if you use the Adobe suite or other programs where you can combine the two images and make a stack. Or you could buy specialized programs like Helicon Focus and Serene, and those two will do that for you and maybe do a better job than what Photoshop would do. But unless you do this an awful lot, I mean a lot, you can get it done very well in Photoshop automatically. So that's what I do with focus stacking.
Can you do it in Lightroom?
I cannot do it in Lightroom.
Yeah, Elaine, I know you focus stack a lot. You want to comment?
I do a lot of focus stacking, but mostly for macro photography. Because you're shooting so close, of course, your depth of field is extremely shallow and it's hard to get even an eye in focus when you're that close. My camera does have in-camera focus features. So it will automatically pick the focal points for me based on a couple of settings that I give it. So it will bracket up to 99 photos, but if you take over 15, you have to stack them manually in some other program. But it will also stack up to 15 photos for you and then generate a separate JPEG file, which is not necessarily as good as what you would get out of Photoshop or the other stacking programs out there. But sometimes I prefer not to focus stack when I'm shooting flowers even close up, because I like the softness of some of the photographs of flowers that are it's just a solitary subject. But there are other times when I want every aspect of that flower from tip of the petal to the tip of the furthest petal to be very sharp, but with the background still blurred. So I use focus stacking for that.
Good, thanks. Kurt, do you focus stack?
Yeah, I do focus stack from time to time, and I have to agree with Elaine on the flowers. It allows you to shoot wide open. You can go like with a 2.8, and then you can focus stack and really keep that background soft, rather than going with like an f11 aperture and then pick up that background in that you don't want to see. But yeah, I do use it from time to time.
Do you use the in-camera capabilities or do it manually?
I use both, and now with my recent camera here, I've been using the in-camera one, and there is a focus stacking app out there that you can do. It'll tell you how many expose or brackets you need to use, which I've used that as well, and it works really, really well.
Okay, Eve?
I don't use it.
Okay, well, that's why I asked. That's good.
Yeah.
Good. All right. And I have used focus stacking quite a bit during the macro work that I've been doing, and actually purchased Helicon Focus. So if anyone's interested in my comparison, I'd be glad to share that with you if you ask. The one time or the scenario where I typically use focus stacking when I'm traveling is if I'm doing like a landscape type shot and I want, especially with a wide angle lens, and I want something interesting in the foreground, but I also want the background to be sharp. I'll usually do this handheld because I'm not carrying a tripod with me, but focus on, I'll keep the camera steady, focus on the close object, okay? Take the picture, and then without moving the camera, focus on the distant landscape and take a second picture, and then combine the two via focus stacking when I get home. That works out well sometimes, because you just can't get, the depth of field is not great enough. If that object up close to you is really close, you can't get it and the background, sharp without focus stacking.
Dennis,
Okay, yes, Joe.
if we go on, I just want to mention one other thing on focus stacking, which I'll do if I'm doing flowers like Elaine was referencing. If this was a flower, if you can see my nose, if you think the flower is over here, I'll do this technique. I'll take my camera and I'll be continuous shooting. I'm on a silent mode right now, so you can't hear the shutter, but I'm taking like 20 shots a second and just going back and forth and back and forth like that, and doing it handheld. And I can take all of those shots, 25, 30, 40 of them, whatever they may be, and I can focus stack it into in Photoshop without having to use focus rails and all kinds of other stuff.
Does Photoshop do a good job when you're moving back and forth?
It does. It does I think it does a good enough job for me. It may not, if I was going to do a really high quality shot, I would use it on a tripod for sure, and then I would focus stack it. But doing that, it does work for me. Otherwise, I'm going to have to handheld. I'm going to have to focus it and then go in a little bit more focus it this way, just by moving back and forth. It's okay. Now it does obviously change the size of the image. Okay, and that's what the that's where its downfall is, and that's where maybe a Helicon Focus can do a better job of it. Or if you have a bug that's moving across, it doesn't do well with that.
Yeah. In my macro work, I found that Photoshop has ran into difficulty focus stacking if I moved back and forth. I found I had better luck if I put on burst mode like Joe does, and then just move, focus on the closest part first, put on burst mode and just move in one direction going, and it would seem to line them up better and was more successful focus stacking. But you could try both and see if it works for you. And it might depend, how close you actually are to the subject, whether you're doing real macro or just close up. Okay. Oh, here's an interesting question. And I'll take this one. Have you ever read the owner's manual from cover to cover? Yes. In fact, I'm anal about this. I'll admit it, but I don't find things intuitive, like picking up a piece of equipment and just feeling comfortable. Oh, I'll figure this out. When I get a new piece of equipment, like a camera, before I ever turn it on, I have my yellow highlighter and this instruction manual, and I read it from cover to cover, and then I'll go back through with the red pen and underline the really important parts, and then I'll turn it on and feel like I, kind of have a note, but I'll keep the manual there beside me so I know what I'm doing. My wife's just the opposite. She'll throw the manual away, turn it on, it won't work the way she expects it to, and then she goes, "Hey, Dad, this thing's not working." And then I have to pull the instruction manual out of the garbage, read it, and then, explain it to her. So I'm the anal type. Maybe it's because I was a physics teacher and, I had to take things very, very carefully and, that sort of thing. But I'm a manual type of guy. That's just the way I am. Eve, how about you?
My first 35 millimeter, I did that. Since then, now I troubleshoot if I can't, like I back button focus. I looked it up on the manual, see how to do that when I got this camera, etc. So if there's something specific, well, actually, I don't even look at the manual. I Google it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Boy, I have found so many things that aren't intuitive, and like working with the iPhone, and I'm going, I Google it and I figured out, who would have figured that out without being told? You got to do this and do that, stand on your head, and no. I read the manual. Elaine, are you a manual person?
Well, I'm like you, I'm kind of anal about that. In fact, part of my job when I was working was instructing a department to write technical manuals. So that is kind of a disadvantage in that I'm very critical of the way the manuals are written. But I do find it very helpful, especially when buying a new camera, a whole different kind of camera than you are accustomed to working with, especially a different brand or going from a DSLR to mirrorless. I will read it initially cover to cover. And then anything that's not clear in the manual, I will Google, or if I just forget something, then later on I will Google the subject. But if I'm just upgrading to a new camera that just is a little more advanced than the one that I'm using, it's the same type of camera, same model, there's not really that much that changes in those upgrades. So I typically will just look at the key points that I need to know that I know have changed. and then Google anything after that.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, one of the reasons I read the manual is to look for those hidden features, the things that aren't obvious, or as you say, if it changed from Model 3 to Model 4, then at least look at the notes to say, hey, here's the stuff that's new with 4, as compared to 3. Joe, you're a manual person?
Yeah, and I do. I typically read the manuals, but as time goes on, for instance, my current camera is a 900-page manual, and it will put me to sleep. Okay, so have migrated more towards watching YouTube videos from folks that I really trust and I know, and I will read those because they're going to give me an insight, not so much about push this button that does this, but push this button and why you push this button and why you do that. And I find that very, very helpful. But I do want to make a comment about Dennis. Okay, now he will every now and then will loan me some of his magazines that he has, his rejects, or he's done looking at them. And when I get them, I basically can see that he's used about 2 yellow markers on the whole magazine. I don't know why he doesn't just highlight everything rather than just the subject, because he highlights so much of it.
That's only on the best articles.
Yeah, so that's enough.
That comes from my days as a physics student, just very detailed. Kurt, how about you? Manuals?
Yeah, I'm a manual person. I used to write manuals too, so I did all on machinery. But yeah, I'm a manual person. And I recently, with my newer cameras, I've downloaded PDFs, put them on your iPhone, and use them as a reference that way. And then I don't even open the package that the manual came in. So when I trade my camera in, I have a fresh manual and box and everything to go with it.
Very good. Like Joe, I've evolved into watching more YouTube videos than previously. The iPhone 14 Pro Max, I've watched a ton of videos to try to learn the ins and outs, of that device. Okay, let's move on. Let's go back to Kurt. Let's see. Oh, somebody asked about getting tack sharp images. What suggestions do you have for getting tack sharp images?
Well, that's something I'm obsessed with.
All right.
Why? I think there's the obvious ones out there. You got to watch your shutter speeds for your motion blur. So make sure you have your shutter speeds up. If you're handheld and taking a picture of a static subject, you can get away with that 1 over your focal length type setting. I find that most of my subjects are moving, so that doesn't work for me. I have to pump it up a lot more. Birds and flights, I like to be up there 1/3200th of a second as my average. I even like to go up well beyond that if I can. Watch your ISOs. If you can, get it down as low as you can to try and get rid of the noise. That'll contribute to a image that's not tack sharp. And another thing here, atmospheric conditions contribute a lot to blurry images. So if you have maybe a hazy day and you've got a telephoto lens on there, you're compressing all that atmosphere in your shot and it's going to show up. Another thing to think about is heat rays coming off the ground. So if you're shooting over water or even snow that's been heated up by the sun a little bit, you're going to have those heat rays coming up, and you want to take that in consideration when shooting for tack sharp. Another thing too is let your equipment acclimate to the ambient temperature. So if we're coming in now to Conowingo Dam, Eagles, and you go down there and your camera's sitting in your car and it's nice and toasty, and you get out and it's 20 degrees, you're not going to get tack sharp shots. You're going to have to let that camera and lens acclimate to the ambient. And another thing that I've found too is if you have your lens hood on, like on a very long lens hood on some of the telephotos, that can contribute to heat rays just coming off the inside of that hood for a while until it acclimates to the cold. And that also reverses itself too. I mean, if you have an air-conditioned car and you're jumping out and you're going into the subtropics or something like that, you want to be careful with that as well. I think that's about it.
Okay, thanks. Joe, how about you? Suggestions for sharp images?
No, I just second everything that Curtis said. And with one addition on the telephoto lens with the big lens hood, if it's windy, that can really screw you up, even if you're on a tripod, because that just, the wind will come in and just take that and shake your lens because you have that big piece of plastic on the front, on the lens hood.
How much do you rely on image stabilization?
I use it when my shutter speeds are low. And I'm usually on a super telephoto lens. I just leave it on. It doesn't take much movement to see it in your image at 840 millimeters. And as long as the image stabilization identifies something that's moving, it's going to work well for you. I think when people run into trouble with that is if the subject in the lens is not moving, then especially the lens corrections, there's a little gyroscope in there and it's going to try and make corrections and there's none to be made. And then you'll get a little bit of a blur from that possibly. Yeah, I use image stabilization on all the time with my super telephoto that I use shoot with, regardless.
Does it slow down the burst rate at all?
I haven't noticed it, no.
Okay, I read somewhere that it might have an effect depending on the camera.
Yeah,
Curtis?
I haven't noticed it.
Curtis, do you use when you're on a tripod, do you use the image stabilization?
Yeah, I have, and I know you should turn it off because of things, but again, like I noticed on a super telephoto 600, 840, it doesn't take a whole lot. You can just breathe on that camera and you can look through and your image is actually jittering. So as long as that jitter's there, the stabilization will pick it up and correct for it. If that's not the case, then yeah, you got to turn it off. I think anything above maybe 1,000 or 1,250 or something like that with your shutter speed, you might as well just turn it off a lot of times because you're going fast enough that you won't have that worry. I think when you run your slow shutter speeds, obviously you're doing landscape shots and you're down there at maybe 100th or less of a second, then yeah, you want to consider running the stabilization off if you're on a tripod.
Yeah,
Or I mean, sorry, on when you're not on the tripod and off when you're on the tripod.
yeah, my approach too is to only use image stabilization when I'm using a longer, shutter speed, because I figure at the shorter shutter speeds, it's not doing much. Elaine, comment on image stabilization?
I use image stabilization all the time, except when I'm using a tripod, but frankly, I don't use a tripod all that much anymore. I noticed when going from a DSLR to a mirrorless camera that the images were much, much more sharper. Partly because you don't get the vibration from the mirror with a mirrorless camera, but also because the image stabilization in my camera is so incredible that I very, very seldom see any motion blur as long as I've got the stabilization turned on. Now, the pro lenses that I use with this camera work in conjunction with the in-camera stabilization system. So there's stabilization on both the lens and on the body that are designed to work together to give you optimal stabilization. And it's just out of this world. Now, I'm at the age where I'm just not all that stable when not using a tripod. I'm kind of a shaky shooter, so I definitely depend on that.
Yeah, shaky shooter, I have to keep that in mind. When I got my Canon R6, I was amazed to read about the in-body image stabilization in addition to the lens image stabilization. So the two work together, and they're claiming it, but only if you have the latest lens to go with the RF lens to go with the camera. But with the right combination, you get up to 8 stops of image stabilization, they're claiming. Yeah, that is just incredible. Yeah, I actually one day I was photographing like a little waterfall, and I handheld the camera 1 second with the image stabilization on both the camera and the lens, and got a sharp image with blurry water. A full second. That was incredible. No, Okay, anything else?
one-
Eve, do you, go ahead,
Oh,
Kurt.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing about just blur too, which I looked here. If you use a UV filter, they're usually pretty cheap and glass is not very good. And I'm one that says throw them in the trash. Because here you spent thousands of dollars for a quality piece of glass and you're throwing a piece of junk in front of it. So that will contribute, in my opinion, and I have strong opinions, to a blur.
Thank you. Thank you.
Amongst other things. You get
Right.
all kinds of refractions and chromatic aberrations and whatnot from additional glass in front of your lens.
Yeah, Joe, who's the wildlife photographer we follow, who recommended not using a UV filter for protection. He did the experiments,
Oh, that was Steve Perry.
Steve, yeah, he went to this elaborate experiments. And if you think that putting the UV filter on the end of your lens for protection is worth it, he says it's not. That it's gonna, as Kurt said, gonna lead to the degradation of your image more than, protect the front of your lens. Yeah, not to worry about it. Okay, any other comments on image stabilization?
Dennis,
guess
it's 10 minutes after 8, 11 minutes after 8.
Okay.
So just wanted to let you know.
Yeah, I got the camera right here, or the clock right in front of me. Yeah, if I guess it's just the mirrorless cameras that have the in-body stabilization and the lens. Is that true? Do you know, Joe?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Anyway, okay, where are we? Oh, let's give Elaine this one. It ties in with the earlier comment we made. Someone asked, when you look at a scene, how do you distill it down to the picture?
If you're referring to how do I separate the subject from the rest of the image? It kind of depends upon what I want that image to look like. Typically, it's by controlling my depth of field, whether I'm controlling it by the focal length or the aperture setting or the distance that I'm shooting from the subject. It's usually the aperture that I will use. There are occasions when, especially if I'm shooting an isolated flower and I want nothing in that picture but that flower to get attention, that I will actually blacken out the background completely to do that. But usually it's depth of field.
Good, thanks. Eve, comments on that? How do you distill down to the picture you want out of a chaotic scene, perhaps?
Sometimes that happens while you're shooting and sometimes it happens when you're post-processing. And I've done post-processing that I've gotten multiple images out of one image for that reason, that I shot wide and I see, once I bring it into the computer, I see this, that's one, I see that, that's one.
The picture in the picture.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right, yeah. Kurt?
Yeah, I'll look at a scene and I'll try and get the distractions as much as I can away and try and get you to look at the subject. But in post is where I really finish it up. Now with Lightroom, be able to pick your subject and be able to work with your background separately and change the brightness and darkness of things and the vignetting and that type of stuff. Yeah.
Oh, we had this discussion on Facebook today.
Yes, we did. Yes,
Yeah,
we
using the select. Well, tell them about using the selection tool. What do you do?
Well, I had that peregrine that I had taken at the Hershey Zoo, and I wanted to separate it from the that wood background there. It was a distraction. It was the luminosity or brightness of that was as bright, or if not brighter, than the bird itself. So I needed to do something there. So I subject selected and then inverted it, which gave me the background, and then I darkened it. Probably took it down almost a full stop. And I went down enough that I could see separation with the bird. After I did that, then I went and opened up a radial graduate filter, and then I inverted it, and that would give me my my vignette. And then I took it down again. I put it over the bird. I didn't want you use the just the vignetting in Lightroom because it darkens the whole scene from around the circle. Whereas with the Radiant Graduate filter, you can select where you want the vignetting to happen. And that's what I did. I put it over where I wanted it, darkened up again, and there it is, done. And that seems to work well for drawing a subject out and getting you to go right to it, as well as depth of field, that type of thing.
Joe, I think you use that similar technique, don't you? Yeah, Joe?
Well,
you
yes, I
use
do.
a similar technique?
I do, except I've gone more towards using the adjustment brush and doing that on the background, like in here when I'm pointing, as opposed to just doing like a radio filter. That way I can highlight and darken certain things. For instance, like the pictures I may keep in the back of the, right back in there. Well, you know, see the pictures back. I might keep them brighter, but do the other things. I've been using more and more of that. It's just,
Excellent. I think it's an excellent technique. In fact, if you are on Facebook and you followed the pictures that I posted from Zoo America from Saturday, every picture that I posted, I used that technique. I had selected, get in Lightroom, select the subject, and I usually like brighten and sharpen the subject a little bit. Then I invert that selection to get the background, and then I darken and soften the background, creates that separation. Now, when it came to the Peregrine Falcon, like Kurt was talking, I didn't use the technique. I looked at that and said, oh, I hate that background. I took it in Photoshop and replaced it with a sky. So just a different technique, but for the same reason, separate the subject from a distracting background. Okay, guys. Well, this might be a good time to end it for the evening. It's been a good hour and 15 minutes. This has been an excellent discussion. I think this has gone really well. I hope members do too. Before we open it up to the membership, Joe, Kurt, Eve, Elaine, thank you for participating. Do you have any final comments? Let's start. Let's do it. Joe, any final
Nope.
comments?
nope.
Okay, Kurt.
No, I'm good, thanks.
Okay, Eve.
I'm good too. I think this was great.
Yeah, Elaine.
Just that I agree. I think it's a good format. I enjoyed the discussion.
Oh, good. And I'm going to survey the members a little bit at this point, I guess. If you enjoyed this format and you would like to do this again in a future meeting, would you just make a comment in chat? Okay. The possibility could be that we would, this time it was devoted to shooting. We were thinking if we use this format again, we would devote the questions and answers to like post-processing. Okay, just an option. So if you would comment in chat, and let me take a look at a few comments that were made. You started out early when Kurt was talking about bird photography, and Marlene asked, how do you expose for the birds? I guess especially she and I had this discussion on Saturday at Zoo America, and I think she's talking about like when they're flying and at one second there are trees behind them, the next second they're out in this clear bright sky. Yeah, how do you handle that?
Oop, that's for me. I shoot manual, so I shoot and meter, so to speak, for the light that falls on the bird, not what reflects back to the camera. So as a bird would travel in front of trees and then go up into the bright sky and then come back down into a dark area, because I expose for the bird, I don't have to worry about my exposure fluctuating up and down, as you would if you're in a priority mode, such as a shutter or aperture, even manual with auto ISO. So I have to find my exposure. So I will find something that's white. Let's say I'm out on water there and I see some Canadian geese, and one of them flips up and throws its white tail in the air. I will shoot that and try and find the blinkies and expose and get the proper exposure. Now I'm set. So anything that flies with that same sunlight on it, same light, same exposure, I'm going to get a perfectly exposed shot. So priorities modes do have their place. If I would be in taking a shot of a hummingbird on a nest and the background's never changing, but maybe the light is changing. It's going up and down because the clouds are blocking the sun. Well, then to me, that is a priority mode. I'll put it on one of the priorities and let the camera adjust for the light coming through on the subject that way. But my background's not changing. So my meter's not going all over the place. But yeah, I watch my blinkies and expose to the right and try and find where I'm clipping and then back it down. And that's for birds in flight. Now, if I'm doing something like flowers or something like that, I may change to a histogram that shows a red, green, blue channel, and I will take a shot and then read my channels. And if I see it clipping red, well, then I'll back it down some more, maybe a third of a stop or 2/3 of a stop. But yeah, that's where I'm at. Usually the regular histogram just averages your red, green, blue, and it won't show it clipping one of the channels. So that's why, for instance, for flower photography, especially red channel for me, I will jump onto the red, green, blue histogram and go and use it as my reference for clipping.
Very good. Any other thoughts on that, Joe?
I'm going to ask Elaine this one. Since you do a lot of flower photography, I find in my Nikon cameras that the red channel blows out way before everything else. And how do you handle that with your mirrorless camera, Elaine? Do you just intuitively know you got to underexpose a little bit for the red rose?
I have found in any camera that red tends to overexpose and becomes oversaturated very easily. Bright colors tend to absorb light rather than reflect it, so they're absorbing more color. And I expose a brightly colored flower like that, just like I would a reflective white flower. I tend to spot meter it to make sure that the red flower is properly exposed. And unlike many people, I tend to expose a little bit to the left rather than to the right. Because of the fact that I am very often photographing things that are easily blown out, I would rather underexpose a little bit than overexpose it. And I found that if you shoot to the right on a brightly colored flower like that, yes, you can correct that in post, but the colors, for some reason, in my experience, will never regain that richness just by reducing your exposure in post that you would naturally get by exposing it correctly in the first place.
Thank you. Okay. Looks like we have quite a few responses in chat, and looks like everyone so far is saying, yeah, they enjoyed the format tonight and would like to do another session sometime. So at this point, let me open it up to the members. If you have a comment or question, simply unmute yourself and go ahead.
Elaine,
Terry.
I have a question for you, Elaine. I think it was you that shot the photograph. It looked like little people, a flower with little people with big eyes. And it was on our site one day for the upcoming program. Do you remember that one?
Little
Okay.
people with big eyes.
And your question is?
Do you remember what the name of the flower was?
I don't remember the image, quite truthfully.
Okay, I thought it was maybe I'm wrong.
Okay, yeah, maybe you could find that, and you could message her and get a direct
I'll try.
response for that. Anyone
Thank you.
else?
Kurt,
Yes.
I found a way to stabilize a long lens on a tripod. Like you were saying, the slightest bit of breeze will cause the image to be just slightly out of focus. I made a rice bag, segmented rice bag that I laid from the front of just behind the front of the lens back to the camera. And when I laid that on, it worked perfect.
Okay, you mean blur, not focus.
I'm sorry?
You mean blur, not focus?
Yeah, from camera shake.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
No, I made it.
Yeah, I
Yes,
understand
yeah,
that.
but to
You-
prevent camera shake.
So it cuts,
Yeah.
that vibration from the air just enough that you won't get the shake.
Okay.
Okay, very good. Anyone else? Any other questions, comments?
I have a question for Elaine. Really love your flowers, Elaine. And is it true that most of them are sort of on site, or do you take flowers inside for still lives? Do you do it both ways?
Both. I do a lot of shooting inside when I want to do macro photography on a flower, just simply because you can eliminate the breeze much better, and it's a whole lot easier to stage a flower that you want to isolate from its natural background when you're in an environment where you can totally control its position and eliminate all of the movement. But I photograph mostly outside, not just in my backyard. We have a beautiful gardens. My husband's a horticulturist, so we have something blooming every month out of the year, even in December and January. So I'm outside a lot at home. Other times of the year, I will visit garden centers during their busiest time of the year when their greenhouses are full of flowers. I go to botanical gardens, anywhere that I can find flowers, I'm there.
That's
Good.
great to hear.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, anyone else?
Dennis, I have a quick question
Yes, Janice.
no, it's Claire.
Claire, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's all right. For all of the manual shooters, sometimes when I try to spot meter, for example, on the white head of an eagle, for some reason, sometimes it doesn't, my meter doesn't change any. So what am I doing wrong? And how does everyone else spot meter in manual mode?
Your meter's not going to aid you in manual mode. It doesn't work.
It
It's
will,
got-
though, if you have your ISO on auto, it does. It will, your ISO will change based on what you're metering.
Okay, so Curtis, when you were talking about the white birds, how were you metering?
I'm taking a shot, reviewing, checking for blinkies and with the light that's on the bird. And once I've made my adjustments, I'm done then. And the meter will not change any of my camera settings because I'm in full manual.
Okay,
But you could, if it were under overexposed, the meter would show you that, right?
Not necessarily, because you don't know where the bird's going to be. The bird could be in front of a dark background, or it could be in front of the sky, and you may have 3 stops of light difference. So your meter's going to go all over the place.
But Claire's talking about spot metering the bird.
Well, I guess if it's a bird on a stick instead of a bird in flight, okay, and you're not moving, yeah, I guess you could do that. But I don't. I mean, my technique is find the clipping and then underexpose so that I eliminate the clipping, and that now I'm done. I'm set. Same light, same exposure is the way it works.
okay, thank you.
Good. Anyone else?
I was wondering if the focus point, so you can't meter using the focus point, is that correct?
Claire, on this one, that depends on your camera. Some cameras, you can use the focus point, and let's say you're spot metering, it will follow the focus point, but that's very few cameras that do that. You have one that happens to do that. And, but that's very, very unusual.
Yeah, the Canon cameras do not.
Okay, thank you.
All right, guys. Hey, let's wrap it up. This has been a great session, as indicated in the chat. Apparently, you enjoyed it too. So appreciate your attendance and your contribution with the questions. Joe, Kurt, Eve, Elaine, thank you very much for contributing. I think it's been really good. A lot of fun. Okay, thanks, guys, and good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Great session.
Okay, now I got to remember how to record the chat session. Do you remember how we do that, Joe? Make sure
I think
is
when
that
you,
automatic.
I think it does it automatically. Then you, when you want to then look at it and download it, it'll say the chat also.
Okay,
I think
very,
so.
very good. What do you think?
I thought that was real good.
Yeah,
Really.
lively discussion, some
Yes.
differing opinions, but yeah, really
Yeah.
good. Really good. I
Yeah.
like that.
I'm glad we didn't have the members piping in during it because it would have went all different directions. then.
Yeah, we knew that from the beginning. So
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
good.
So, yeah. I thought-
Okay. Yep.
Okay.
Thanks. Good
Take care.
night.
We'll see you guys.
Yeah.
Bye.